Welcome back to the Pushing Through Loss podcast. I am your host, Kalila Green Siciliano. On last week's episode, we were speaking with Sam, who told us all about her journey to becoming a stillbirth mom. On this week's episode, we go more into how she found answers as to what happened and how she pushed through it to really make her daughter's life have meaning, and how she's helping others who have become stillbirth parents as well.
I did find out later, about 6.5 years later, I was at a stillbirth conference.
Wow.
And I randomly, I got into the session a little bit late, and the only seats left were in the front row. So I go sit in the front row. I get at one point they're like, okay, introduce yourself to the person next to you. So I turn, and the guy sitting next to me turns out to be a stillbirth researcher and a placental pathologist from Yale. And this is Dr. Harvey Kleiman, who's now a very good friend of mine and one of our board members. And he says to me, "Do you know what caused your daughter's stillbirth?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm like 99% sure." And he was like, "Do you want to be 100% sure?" I was like, "Yes." And he was like, "Do you know that your hospital is supposed to keep like slides of your placenta of actually, and this it's not your placenta, it's the baby's placenta."
Right.
Because every placenta is unique to the baby.
Right.
They're supposed to keep slides of your baby's placenta on file for at least 10 years. And so I can have my assistant call and have them sent over to me, and then I can look at them, and I can, 98% of the time find out an actual cause just from looking at that. And I'm just like, what?
Like,
and
where have you been?
Exactly. Like, people don't know that this is out there. Nobody tells you.
Right.
So, at this point I was, had already started getting involved with volunteering and advocacy and helping other parents. And I'm just like, I'm connected with like 100 of other parents who would love to have answers. So I was like, let me guinea pig this on myself.
Right.
So I after the conference, I went through the process. Lo and behold, and at this point in time, I'm thinking like, I'm through the grief. I'm over it. I've processed it. I know it wasn't my fault, even though I wish I'd done things differently. And it comes back and like totally, it initially seemed like totally different from what I thought had happened. So of course it all researches. I go back to the 4-page list of all the things I must have done to cause my daughter's death and be like,
Right.
could this have done it? And so Dr. Harvey, so wonderful. He was just like, come in for a consultation. He sat with me for 2 hours.
Wow.
Went through my full list of craziness and reassured me over and over again that none of those things could possibly have caused what happened. And it turns out what happened, it was a cord accident. And it was because the cord was getting compressed because it was short and thin and hypocoiled and basically
not functioning properly.
Very little structural integrity
right.
In her cord. But what's number one gave me a lot of relief, because it was clear that it was not my fault from one time doing something wrong. But at the other extreme also made me extremely furious, because it made it really clear that there was time that this could have been caught and this could have been intervened weeks. So around 37-ish weeks, I remember I had, number one, started getting this really weird feeling like she's going to come early. And of course, at this point, I'm thinking like a 37-weeker is like going to be in the NICU for 6 months. And,
right.
I'm like freaking out. I'm just like, oh my God, why am I having this feeling? Like, this is so weird.
She has to go to full term. Whenever she's ready, she's ready.
Exactly. And like, I'm like, and her movement changed. It started, she didn't move a ton, like compared to my other kids. I would say if she was my third instead of my first, I would have known right away that something was wrong, because her behavior in utero was so different from my. But again, I had nothing to compare it to. I assumed that was normal. And it's, for some babies it is normal. Again, we always say, no, you're normal. Every baby's different.
Right. And every pregnancy is different. Every baby is different. And right.
Exactly. And so, but she definitely slowed down. And, I brought it up at every, I had 3 more checkups between then
and that's the frustrating part, is like with an ultrasound or with any of the technology, they can't see the placenta. It's not something that you can see the umbilical cord. It's not something you can see the placenta unless they start doing more tests. It's not something you would necessarily notice.
Yeah. So that was the, so first, I mention it every time, and then I'm met with the old wives' tale. Oh, babies, it's just they slow down. They're
Right.
running out
There's
of
not a lot of room in there.
getting ready for birth, saving them for birth, right?
Right.
The other thing was that I had not had a detailed ultrasound since my anatomy scan at 20 weeks.
Wow.
And even at my 39-week checkup, my fundal length measured smaller than usual. It had been growing on schedule, and all of a sudden it was like a half inch smaller. And
I mean, that should have been a thing right there, a red flag.
right. So and actually, my doctors did take it seriously. They, I had an NST, everything was fine. They put me on an ultrasound. But I'm in the office. This is not an MFM's office.
Right.
So they have like a great ultrasound, and it's not like their thing really. It's mainly just to check. Yeah, she's alive in there, looks fine. But
Right.
they're not checking things like her fluid levels. I think if we had any baseline to compare it to, what we would have seen that day is that her fluid levels had dropped significantly because she had by that point been struggling for 2 weeks
Right. So her kidney functions were down.
through, through hundreds of episodes of cord compression.
Oh,
That's what the slides show. And so it would get compressed and the pressure would build, and then it
and then would open.
through. Exactly. And so what she actually died of was fetal maternal hemorrhage. She died of blood loss over 2 months.
Wow.
And so, if she had been having growth scans like my other kids did, and all they're pregnant every 4 weeks, they had a growth scan. What we would have seen is that, yeah, she wasn't a small baby. She was, 50.
She was growing normal, and then stopped.
And then stopped. And yeah, that doesn't get flagged in normal pregnancy because they just look if the baby's under 10th. But that doesn't matter. The same way that you have, when you bring your kids to a pediatrician, if they fall off the growth chart, that's a red flag.
Right.
And the other thing I will mention too is that the majority of doctors will tell you that they cannot see the cord, they cannot see the placenta, they can't do anything with that.
Right.
That is not true.
Oh, interesting, because that's always what I've been told.
Always what you've been told, and most of them believe it to be true.
Right.
But it's not true, because there are lots of again, usually MFMs, and particularly researchers who have figured out how even pretty late in pregnancy to, it's an art and it's not easy, but you can, especially nowadays with the 3D ultrasound and stuff like that, you can scan the full length of the cord, and to check for things like knots or obstructions. Anybody can do Doppler flow to check the blood flow in the cord to make sure.
Right. I have seen that because
exactly. To show that the blood flow in and out is going
right. Well, that's how they first realized that the baby, when we couldn't find the heartbeat, that was the first thing she looked at, was to see what the blood flow looked like.
Exactly. And the other thing is that, so this same doctor, Harvey Kleiman at Yale, so he has a really interesting backstory. So he's a placental pathologist, but he's super into the placenta, but he's just a very curious person. And his dad was a NASA scientist who did all the programming on, I think it's the Voyager.
Oh,
whatever one is furthest out there in the universe from.
Okay.
His dad did that. And so, he's just really curious about stuff. And he had, one of the things he had been doing is serving as an expert witness in medical negligence trials. Because he also, he did some time, he loves delivering babies, but he didn't like the hours. So that's why he's an MD, PhD, and he's just got a lot of varied interests. And so I think in order to have some more exposure to the actual world of birth, he was doing these trials, and he noticed a pattern that a lot of the parents, when he looked at the records, the baby's placenta was quite small, like less than 1 percentile by volume of weight.
Wow.
And he was like, that's weird. And so, he noticed the pattern that there's a certain ratio between the baby size and the placenta size. And if it gets over a certain threshold, the placenta just gives out. It can be a perfectly healthy placenta, or it could be a placenta that, was having, insufficiency issues. But whatever it is, the functioning part of the placenta was just too small to sustain, a large-eyed baby. And again, most doctors will tell you that, oh, well, if the placenta's small, then the baby will just slow their growth and they'll just be a smaller baby. And in many cases, that is true, but not in all cases.
Right.
And I know hundreds now of moms who had very big babies and very tiny placentas who lost them right at the due date because
Wow.
that's because it was fine because the
Right.
placenta worked great until the baby just
Until
got
it didn't.
until it didn't. Exactly. And so Harvey noticed this and he went to his colleagues in OB and was just like, why aren't you guys like looking for a small placenta? And they're like, oh, because you can't see it, like you can't measure it. And it's
He's
this
like,
weird.
hold up.
Yeah, and he's like, and it's like this weird shape. It's shaped like a yarmulke, and like, how are we supposed to measure that in utero?
Right.
And so Harvey was like, so my dad, my whole childhood, would like give me math problems. So I went back to him and was like, Dad, I got a math problem for you. How can you estimate the volume of this odd shaped, geometric shape, with a few simple measurements? And his dad came up with a formula, three simple measurements on any 2D ultrasound. They can estimate, within like 90 something percent accuracy,
Wow.
the size of the placenta.
Wow.
And so now this is a tool to estimate placental volume. And it can be used in utero to check. And so again, I always say, if this had been if this has been happening, because and it's really important again because this so frequently happens at the end of pregnancy. I mean, ideally you want it done throughout the pregnancy,
Right.
but
Because then, like you said, with that baseline, all of the statistics leading up to it, and you have all of those key information points to know what's normal
exactly
and what's not.
risk stratification. This is exactly what doctors
Right.
do. This is what they're trained to do. And the more
Right.
information you have, the more tools in the toolbox, the better decision you can make
Right.
about in or out. That's what Harvey always says. He's like, pregnancy comes down to, obstetrics is all comes down to the question of, is the baby better in or out?
Right.
And you're just, calculating those risks and using your instincts and hopefully listening to the parent and using her instincts.
Right.
Um,
Especially because she's the one that's feeling everything.
exactly.
Right.
And so, yeah, so I always say, like, if you and Alana did not have a small placenta, she had a perfectly normal sized placenta. And I think if she had been measured the whole time along and her placenta had been measured, what we would have seen is that at 37 weeks, her placenta continued growing on that 70th, 80th percentile
And then
scale.
it just dropped.
And then she dropped.
Right.
Yeah. And again, it's so crazy because she was delivered at 39 weeks and 6 days and she weighed 6.5 pounds, which again is not a
No.
small baby, right?
No.
But my next two kids, her brother and sister, were delivered at 37.5 weeks and weighed 8 pounds or more.
Wow.
Yeah. So she was way smaller than she should have been.
Right.
Yeah. So like so it's just so infuriating as I went through this next pregnancy to see how much better care that I got and how many things could have been done differently
Right.
by me and my providers.
Right. You're like, why isn't this done normally?
That's what I said. Why should I have to pay for this level of care with my child's life? Like
Right.
every baby and every parent deserves this.
Right.
And like, yeah.
Whether you're high risk or not. And it's funny because it's sort of this like weird dichotomy where I always say being pregnant is not this medical emergency. But then at the same
you're not
time,
At the
right.
same time, you have to understand there's a life, two lives on the line here.
Right.
Right? Like you have to treat it like this is a life to lose.
Right.
Not everything's gonna be fine unless, something crazy happens. Like
Right.
it's not guaranteed. And that was, that's the big lie that we are telling parents these days is like you think once you're through the first trimester,
Everything's fine. Right.
good. And that's why it's so critical to have, podcasts like yours and people like us out there telling our stories because no parent deserves to be blindsided the way
Right.
that we were. And I also we know we'll never prevent every stillbirth, but every parent that goes through this deserves to know that at minimum, everything possible was done to give
Right.
their baby the best possible chance. And no parent in America can say that today.
Right.
And the research shows very clearly, conservatively, at minimum, 1 in 4 stillbirths in the United States could be prevented using current tools and technologies,
Wow.
including 47% of term stillbirths, 37 weeks or later. And if we matched our best international counterparts, we matched their stillbirth rates, we would be preventing up to 75% of US stillbirths.
Wow.
And again, people don't understand how many children that is.
Right.
I mean, it is like when you take a step back, the average OB sees 1 or 2 stillbirths a year. So they just think, oh, this is this horrible thing. It just happens. There's nothing you can do. We hear, oh, these things just happen. These things
Right, but there's thousands of OBs around the country. So multiply that number.
Exactly. When you actually look at the numbers from the CDC's about child deaths and causes, that the causes of child death, the top causes of child death that you always hear about, right? And you're given all these tools to make sure that doesn't happen to your baby, like prematurity and SIDS and car accidents and drowning and guns and fire and poison and flu and listeria, right? Every pregnant person knows not to eat a piece
Yep.
of sushi or a freaking sandwich. If you add all of those up, all those child deaths up to age 14 in the United States, it is 1/3 of the number of stillbirths every year.
Wow.
1/3. We're losing 3 times as many children as
Wow.
all those things combined.
Wow.
And yeah, and like even doctors they just don't realize, they hear, oh, it's like 1 in 170, that's less than 1%. And it's like, but we have a lot of births in this country. So less than 1% is literally tens of thousands of children.
Right.
21,000 stillbirths, the most recent data. If you look back over the last 10 years, it's averaged around 23,000. And so that comes to 65 a day.
Wow.
That's 3 kindergarten classes,
Right.
entire large bus full
Right.
children dying, potentially preventable death every single day. And of course, just like with maternal mortality and morbidity, it is affecting Black, Indigenous, and people of color, at more than twice the rate. Some of this can be explained by social determinants of health, but a very large portion of it is actually just due to systemic racism and implicit bias. Again, we know paternalism is rampant in medicine and particularly in obstetrics for anybody.
Mm.
But I always say the less that you look like me and the less you have the advantages at your disposal, and privileges that I do, the more likely it is to happen to you because like I hear from my mom, my Black mom, stillbirth mom friends, the stories that they tell are just horrific. Like, my friend Jay Wilson from Melanated Moms, like she first of all started bleeding while sitting on a train.
Yikes.
And I think a subway actually into New York City from New Jersey, and all these people just sat there and looked at her. No one said or did a thing to help her. She got off the train and she went into a police station for help, and instead they treated her like, "What did you do? What did you do here? Like, why are you here? And
Right.
what did you do to cause yourself to bleed?" And she was like, "I need help." And she said all of her appointments, like leading up to that in that pregnancy, because she was young at the time too, she'd walk in and they'd be like, "Okay, where's your Medicaid card?" And she's like, "My
Why do I
dad's
have
a
to have a
lawyer."
Medicaid card?
Like, my dad's a lawyer. Like, I have private insurance. Like, they're just immediately just like discount. And
Right.
it's disgusting. What is
And I
going
think part of it is education. Part of it is understanding what is quote unquote normal in pregnancy and what is not normal in pregnancy. Like, same thing. I mean, look, we're both white women, so I can't speak on anybody else's experience. However, I know that when I was going through it, like you, I educated myself on every step. I read every book I could possibly find. I listened to every podcast I could possibly listen to. I talked to my friends who were already parents. I talked to people who had gone through everything I could possibly imagine that would have to do with birth. And I don't know that the same level of care exists in other cultures or in other cities, right?
Yeah.
So in Judaism, it's very much a social culture. We all build a village, we all rely on each other. And so even from the moment you're pregnant and you start telling people, it's okay, what are you feeling? What are you doing? How's today? How, like, did the baby move? Did this happen? Did that? And you're like, okay, people are checking up on me. I don't know that it's the same in people of color. I don't know that it's the same in indigenous cultures. I have no idea. I can't speak to that lived experience.
Yeah, exactly. And I think like I think in many cases it is the same, except there, because, particularly for Black families who've come from this legacy of racism and slavery in this country, right? Like, and who have, intergenerational trauma and have been through loss of so many different types and violence, there is this pressure to just kind of suck, the superwoman, be the superwoman, like Black women are strong and, like we can get through whatever, we're not gonna complain. And so there is this culture of not talking about death, and particularly the death of a child, again, because this was something that so many people had been through, that they were just like, we're just gonna push through it. I watched I think it was Dr. Terry Major Kincaid. She's this amazing, she's actually a neonatologist, but she does a lot of like bereavement stuff. And she did this fantastic webinar for Return to Zero Hope a few years ago, talking about this Superwoman syndrome and how it affects, Black families and people of color who go through loss. And I think that it holds over into the prevention because, again, you can't advocate for yourself if you don't know that your baby can die.
Right.
And what I, like Marjorie Vale, one of the directors, other directors at Push, again, she's a Black mom. She lost her first child, very similar circumstances. And she was like, I came home from the hospital and like no one would talk about it. And
Right.
like again, this was a much more recent. This was not 30 years ago. I mean, it was like 18 years ago. She's the one with the wisdom in our, our team. She's the first ahead of all of us. But yeah, she was just like, in my community, no, this is not something that we talk about. And so yeah, I mean, and that's the same everywhere, but again, it's to different degrees in different communities. And I always say, oh, awareness is the first step to prevention. Like,
Right.
why would you even think to speak up if you don't know that there's a chance your baby could be in trouble? I mean, I
Right.
literally, like, that you hear all the time from stillbirth moms, like the last night of my baby's life, like they were going crazy or like they were frantic, they were kicking around. Like, I thought it was so weird, but I took a video of it because we thought it was funny. And like, and even when you say something to, like, your sister or your mom or your friends, they're like, oh, that's normal. Babies just, everyone just like brush it. It's gonna be fine, it's gonna be fine. And it's just like, you don't know that it's gonna be fine,
Right.
and you deserve to be heard. And so yeah, I mean, we have a long way to go in this country, in terms of making sure people aware that stillbirth still happens, that it happens even in healthy low risk pregnancies, and that there are things you can do to lower your risk.
Right.
Because if all families and all of their loved ones that they're going to for advice knew this, there would be a lot more people thinking twice about what they're going through and speaking up. But then,
Right.
and then to take that a step further, again, we need every parent to, like, a bunch of hashtags. We use hashtag know you're normal, hashtag movements matter, hashtag always ask. If
Right.
you have any concerns, always ask.
Right.
Uh, hashtag if you're not being heard, use your mom voice. That one came from our friends at the Preeclampsia Foundation. I love that one.
Nice.
Like,
Also, I feel like hashtag you're not crazy is a good one because
yeah,
anything you could be thinking, like, look, just say it out loud. You
exactly.
never know.
Never know. Yeah, and so, there really is this culture. And again, because so many people have had the experience of when they do speak up, not being
They've been
received.
brushed aside.
Exactly, that they're
Yeah.
just like, oh, it's just me. I'm just like a dumb first time mom. Or
Right.
like, I don't want to bother them. It's just
Right.
like, that's literally their job. Like, in what other field, like, you're literally you have hired this person to get you and your baby safely through pregnancy.
Right.
And in what other, like, way are you the customer and you're like, you know what, I'm not going to say anything because I don't want to bother this person I'm paying. It's like,
Right.
no. They, this
Feel free to bother.
feel free to bother them, number
Right.
one. And if they don't want to be bothered, that is a huge red flag, because
Right.
that
Find a
person
different doctor.
doctor.
Right.
Exactly. I always say, vote with your feet, vote with your feet, vote with your. And again, that is coming from a place of privilege, because I know that not everybody has that ability.
And I
It's
think that's the other thing is that I didn't know that halfway through my pregnancy, I could switch doctors. Like, just
yeah,
because you've picked a doctor doesn't mean that you're committed to that person. You didn't marry them.
yeah. You don't even have to deliver the hospital. But that's, we hear now a lot through the push social media from parents who are in crisis, because they're like, something is wrong and my doctor's not hearing me. Or like, I go and they're just like, I go to the hospital and they're just like, you seem fine, and send me home. And we're just like, okay, here's what you got. It's like, go to a different hospital, find the next closest hospital,
I get a
go.
second opinion in no other way in terms of a health emergency in any way, shape, or form would you go to one doctor and be like, well, this is what they told me.
Yeah, so I guess I must just be fine. I'm just not. It's
Right.
like,
You
you want
go
to
for a
say,
second opinion.
yeah, like, you have to understand that you are actually fighting for your child's life.
Right.
And so, like, that's the way you need to frame it to yourself, because we know as a parent that you will do anything to keep your baby safe. But, again, we in this culture treat people like they're not parents until the baby's in their arms. And we're like,
Right.
no, parenting starts during
I
pregnancy.
was actually just thinking the same thing where I was like, imagine what you would do if your baby was alive and they had the flu. Would you just settle for like, no, it's okay, your
You're
baby can
fine, just gonna go
breathe?
home. No, or the juice. That's what I always say. The freaking juice. I'm like, there is no evidence that drinking orange juice is gonna help you. But like, if you walked in the room and found your toddler like lethargic on the
Right?
floor,
Would you give them
he
juice?
doesn't be like, oh, here, honey, have some orange juice. Let's see if you perk up.
Right.
Like, no, clearly there's something wrong with this child, and they need to be seen. Even if you gave them orange juice and they perked up, like
Still go
that.
get checked out.
Yeah, exactly. You wouldn't just be like, oh yeah, I get that. They just need some
Like
sugar.
you gave them a spoonful of sugar, but it's not going to
It's not
help.
gonna fix anything.
Right.
Exactly.
It's like
Like,
having an EpiPen for people with allergies that like, okay, you had an EpiPen, you're done. No, you still need to go to the hospital.
you don't need to go to the hospital. Exactly. Oh my God. Yeah, no, it's crazy. I mean, it's just so crazy how so many things we do in obstetrics are just completely nonsensical,
Right.
not based on logic, not based. And then the most infuriating part of it, I have to tell you, is that when we as stillbirth advocates go to somebody like ACOG, who sets the standard of care, and said, oh, here's a new tool like this EPV, which is no cost, takes 30 seconds, non-invasive, there are no risks associated with it, and it can give doctors additional information to help them make better decisions about their patients. They're like, no, we can't use that because there's not enough evidence. And we're like,
Like
okay, so
maybe
what?
if you used it, there'd be more
We're
evidence.
like, so what evidence do you need? Like, tell us what study. And we have
Right.
a bunch. We have hundreds, thousands. Now have 6,000 letters. Over 6,000 letters have been sent to ACOG leadership from bereaved parents across the country saying, please do something about the stillbirth crisis. Here are some tools you could try that are free. We said we will crowdfund a huge research study to do whatever you need to do, and they can't seem to tell us. And we're just
Or,
like,
you don't even need to crowdfund. Have like 10 doctor's offices in one state or in many states add it to their protocol.
seems very simple, right? And you know what the doctors say? I can't do that till ACOG tells me to, because it opens them up to liability.
It makes me
Because
so
even
angry.
if, yeah, so what we have learned over the last couple of years of trying to advocate is that ACOG is purposefully keeping the standard of care low
Right.
for low
The
risk.
bureaucratic system is so difficult.
Yeah, because the higher the standard of care, the more likely it is that doctors will be convicted for negligence. And ACOG likes to present themselves as like a this industry organization that puts, the care of patients and stuff first. But what they really are is a lobbying organization
Right.
for doctors. And so their top motivation is to
Protect their
protect
doctors.
them. Hmm. And so they have no incentive.
Right.
Basically the easier the standard of care is to hit, the harder it is to build a case against doctors. And obstetrics is the number two most likely specialty to be sued in this country, and they pay the highest malpractice insurance um of any specialty. So doctors are trained, like they're very wary about doing anything outside the standard of care,
Right.
because even if they're trying to do something better, it opens them up to liability. And
Right.
so ACOG, again, they are very incentivized to make it as easy as possible for their OBs, keep the standard of care low. And the way they do that is by telling people like us who have buried our children because of their absolutely shit standards of care that are nowhere near what we see in other countries, um, that, oh, you need more evidence, you need more research. Meanwhile, if you look at literally 90% of clinical practice in obstetrics, there is no evidence behind it. It
Right.
is there because it's what we've always done.
The
There is
other thing that
no
bothers me is that midwives have been pushed so far out of the
that.
practice. Midwives have been taught in all of history, all of the abnormalities, all of the things that should be going right, all of the things that should be going wrong, and they're there for you and they're there for your baby. It is not something that they're just trying to get babies in and get babies out and that's it. And it bothers me so much as a doula that
No,
midwives are not respected nearly as much as they should be.
no, yeah, no, it's totally, it's very interesting because we work really closely with Dr. Alex Heasel out of the UK. He's the creator of the first Rainbow Clinic for pregnancy after loss care, where they do everything the way you would want it to be done in a pregnancy after loss. And so, as Push, we brought that model to the US for the first time with Mount Sinai. Now there's a handful of others that are doing it and starting to become a thing here, which is absolutely fantastic. And really, it was very interesting. So we actually went out to Manchester to like their Rainbow Clinic annual training day where they have like 20 Rainbow Clinics in the UK, and they've done fantastic. Like again, we, moms have had a stillbirth are 5 times more likely, almost 5 times more to have another, and they have gotten their stillbirth rates in this high risk population down below that of the general population.
Wow.
Like again, paying attention to people works. And
Right.
who was there in that room that day for the Rainbow Clinic training? 90% midwives.
Amazing.
And you're just like, because everybody sees a midwife in the UK. It's a totally different model. And like
Right.
Alex is an MFM. And like, yes, he is involved in these pregnancies, but like the patients have a very special one-on-one relationship with the midwife who gets to know them, gets to know their baby, gets to know their body, and actually listens. She
Right.
actually listens to what this parent has to say about
Right.
their pregnancy.
Right.
It makes a huge difference. It really does. And we're only starting to get some of that. I mean, or I should say, we had it. We used to have
We
a
went away from it in like the 50s
very
and
robust
60s, and
system of
then right.
midwives, granny midwives,
Right.
particularly Black women who were enslaved, delivered all the babies, and they had all of this knowledge that they had passed on over generations. They're absolutely fantastic at it. And then white men decided, oh no, actually we need to do this, and
Right.
everything went downhill from there.
Yep.
So we're seeing a resurgence now, especially in the Black maternal health community, because of the maternal mortality rates and the just overall horrific outcomes that people of color see. And so there is a push for more midwives and more doulas, and to make sure that for people who are giving birth in a hospital, that they have the opportunity to be empowered to make decisions for themselves and to ask questions and to have
Right.
choices and not be forced into things.
And that's one of the reasons why I love being a doula, is because as somebody who's around this a lot, any verbiage or any vocabulary that the doctors come in with or the nurses come in with, that they're just spewing off information to each other, and the mom is sitting there like,
What
what does
is
that
going
mean?
on,
Is that
right?
normal? Is that okay? And I can at least interpret what it is and have them be their own advocate, because a
Exactly.
lot of times
What
it's jargon
questions
that
do
you
you need
don't
to ask?
understand.
Yes, exactly. So we work with this other fantastic doctor. Her name is Dr. Tracy Chevelle, and she is an MFM by trade. She was an MFM for many years. She also is very interested in like women's health. She's mental health, so she's done a lot of additional kind of training and stuff on that. And she's a NICU mom, so she went through high risk pregnancy. Had babies in the NICU, and Tracy started this new model of care, which we absolutely love. So it came about because during COVID, she's immunocompromised, so she couldn't go into the office, and the hospital she was just like, no, that's not going to fly. So she was like, all right, well, I'm not going to risk my life. I'm sorry. And so she quit, and she was just like, you know what? None of this is working anyway. I'm going to figure out how to do it better. So she created this new model of care where she's basically a patient advocate. Like she markets it as being, it's like having a best friend who's an MFM. And so, and she figured out how to get it covered by insurance. And people can just talk to her online, over like telehealth conferences and stuff like that. And that's what she does. It's like basically like a doula, but with MFM training.
Nice.
She doesn't physically go and be there. It's also great to have a doula. But like what patients will do, especially those that are in high risk pregnancies, those are in pregnancies after a loss, will come back and be like, okay, this is what they're telling me. And she'll be like, all right,
Right, here's my 4-page printout that my doctor gave me. What does this mean? I know he explained it, but I wasn't listening, or I only took in part of what they said, or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. And Tracy will go back and be like, these are the questions you need to ask. Like,
Nice.
if they're not hearing you, here's how to phrase it in a way that they will actually listen to. Like, and basically just having that as a resource. And it's really ridiculous that we have to do this in
Right.
order to get proper care in our system. But unfortunately, it's the reality of what we're dealing with today.
Right.
So yeah, she's several moms on our team have worked with her
Nice.
with pregnancies and stuff, and yeah, it's been really helpful.
So tell me quickly, because we're almost running out of time, but tell me a little bit about your team, about Push, what you guys do, and then where people can find Push.
Awesome. So we're very easy to find at pushpregnancy.org and at pushpregnancy on every social media platform.
Perfect.
Um, So that's where you find us. And yeah, so we are a team of bereaved parents, all stillbirth moms, and some dads and some awesome dads from around the country. And we came together in 2021 to say enough is enough. We cannot watch other families continue to go through the same way that we have been. The rates have not budged in decades. And someone needs to be willing to get out there and push people outside their comfort zones to make it to make change happen. And so that's kind of who we are. Like if you think of ACT UP from the 90s from the AIDS epidemic, and kind of how they they had this kind of like magic combination of being able to get the attention of people in power, and then also to then give them tools that are actually valuable that they can use to create change. That's kind of what we're modeled after. And so, yeah, so our work is kind of split between top-down systemic change and then like grassroots empowerment. So, obviously we have a ton of like free resources for anybody who's currently pregnant, and particularly pregnant after a loss, linking to the latest research and, like empowered pregnancy tip cards. And, that's what most of our social media and stuff is around, is helping to empower parents with basically all the things that we wish somebody had told us, so that we would know that we had done everything we could in our power to get our babies here safely. But that obviously is just a stopgap solution. We will never be able to reach every parent. And frankly, again, parents shouldn't have to advocate this hard for themselves through their pregnancies. You should be able to trust that you go in and you're getting taken care of the way you're supposed to. So the other thing that we're doing, and that I think again makes us different from others in our field, is we're really pushing for top-down systemic change. And so we are advocating with the NIH and ICHD. We are advocating with the CDC. We are advocating with ACOG and SMFM, and with HRSA, who does Title V maternal and child health funding for all the states. And basically just, we go to DC very often, meeting with legislators to help support. Several of our partners have federal bills out in Congress right now for stillbirth prevention. Actually, just one just passed the Senate yesterday.
Wow.
Yes, and that the Maternal and Child Health Stillbirth Prevention Act from our friends at Healthy Birthday and Count the Kicks.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's actually really simple. It's really no brainer. It should have passed already. We're hoping, so it's got to go it passed in the House yesterday. It had passed previously, and now it's got to go back to the Senate.
Okay.
And pass it there. Then it goes to the president, and then we're good.
Nice.
And so what this is literally just a wording change, because the 30-page Maternal and Child Health Act, which provides funding to the states, federal funding to all the states for anything that's going to benefit moms and babies and kids, does not include the word stillbirth once. It was written in 1930, when I guess stillbirth was common and was not thought to be preventable. And so just nobody thought to put it in there, and it hasn't been updated since then.
Wonderful.
Yeah, so all this is, and so
Is
like
literally just adding stillbirth.
literally just adding the word stillbirth. And the thing is that you can use the funds already to fund stillbirth prevention stuff, but many state Department of Health officials don't know that because it doesn't actually say it. So like our friends at Count the Kicks, will go to states and be like, hey, we have all these resources to educate providers and patients on fetal movement monitoring. And they'll be like, oh, this looks great, but I don't know if we can use our Title V funding for this. And they're like, no, I promise you can. And they're like, yeah, but it doesn't say that here. So
guess what? Now it does.
now it's
Nice.
nothing yet, but it's going to hopefully.
Okay.
So yeah, so we've been part of several teams of advocates over the last couple of years who've gone to DC and actually just met with tons of legislators across both houses, both parties. And the thing that's been really wonderful is that stillbirth is one of those rare things that everybody can get behind. The bills that are like the Shine for Autumn Act, I think the main sponsors are Cory Booker and Marco Rubio.
Wow.
So if those two guys can agree on this, I mean, it's a pretty like clear,
straightforward, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so, but at the same time, again, people just don't understand the urgency, especially elected officials. Anyone who doesn't know somebody who had been through a stillbirth,
Right.
doesn't understand how frequently this is happening, how awful it is. And so, a lot of what needs to be done is just telling our stories and getting it out there. And
Right.
so another thing that we did a couple years ago, God, it's crazy, it's been 2 years already. In October 2022, we hosted the Big Push to End Preventable Stillbirth, which was a march on DC. We were on the National Mall. We had a huge stage. We had hundreds of people come in from all across the country to push empty strollers past Congress.
Aww.
Enough is enough. And thousands more watched online. And we had this incredible art art installation made of 23,000 baby hats, one for every baby born still. And
Wow.
it was huge, like 40 feet. And we had parents were able to write their baby's name and stick them in the hat.
Wow.
And safety pin them in there. And we're working on trying to get that to become like a traveling awareness installation, because it is really, really powerful. And yeah, like again, people just don't understand the scale of the problem. And
Right.
so yeah, so push is just really, number one, focusing on awareness for all levels, from medical and public health down to individual families, and anybody who's making policies that affect them, education, for parents and providers, and just building this community and making sure that parents know that they're not powerless. Because I remember, after Alana's death, those first few weeks, as I, was frantically researching things and trying to figure out what was happening and why this was like this, I just remember feeling so overwhelmed. I was just like, this is such a mess.
Mhm.
How am I ever going to do anything? How could I possibly do anything to fix this? Um, and yeah, here we are 10 years later, and there has been a lot of movement in the last couple of years. And so yeah, we know again as parents that the grief comes and goes, your energy levels ebb, life changes, you go through a pregnancy after a loss or two or three, and you know stuff you know stuff shifts. And so we've kind of set it up in such a way so that our change makers, that's what we call our volunteers, um can always know that they have somewhere where they can devote their time and energy or funds or whatever it is they have to give that would make them feel like they're doing something in honor for their child, um that they can do it through us in a way that's going to be really effective and is going to allow them to focus on whatever it is they're passionate about, because we have our hands in so many buckets. It's just like, what are you interested in? Okay,
Take
here's
your
a lot.
pick.
Yes, exactly. And even if all they can do is, like and share our social media posts, that is huge. I mean, we're having quarters where we reach over 2 million people.
Wow.
The other day I was on a News Nation cable news segment. There were 5.5 million viewers.
Nice.
And, I can guarantee you the vast majority of them never heard the word stillbirth outside of a
Right.
Victorian context, right? Like, and those kind of things are going to move the needle. We saw the maternal mortality community do it in the last few years, and they've
Right.
been huge. That started with a ProPublica investigation. And guess what? There is a entire ProPublica series on stillbirth right now,
Nice.
that they are continuing to add stories to all the time, to show like what a huge systemic problem this is, and that it's fixable. That's the thing that's most frustrating, is that it really doesn't take much to fix this problem,
Right.
because it's like very common sense. It's like, have some like very clear protocols that people follow when they report when parents report changes in fetal movement.
Right.
Give everyone a standard third trimester ultrasound to check for growth
I
restriction.
feel like also empowering each person is a huge thing to know. Like, if you could have some sort of tracker that you could say, I'll look back and say, oh, week 20, I was feeling this movement. Week 30, I was feeling this movement. I know
Yes.
week 20, the baby's a lot smaller, but why is it so different?
And that is exactly what our forensic count the kicks have. They have an
Right.
app. It's free. You put it on your phone,
Right.
and once a day you do a kick count, record how much time it did, record how strong your baby is,
Right.
how strong movements, because if any changes to their normal pattern, their normal frequency or
It'll show up.
exactly is a and it's a red flag. And then
Right.
it helps because again we get brushed off so much to be able to show the data.
Right.
And fetal movement, like we always say, is like a wonderful way to bond with your baby. You get to know your baby. Like that's how they can communicate with you. And the whole family can do it. Like you could sit there and have your husband and your other kids and stuff with their hand on their belly, and everyone would be like, I feel the baby move, like that's
Right.
a really great way to make this baby part of your family before they
Arrive.
yes, arrive on the other side
Right.
of the vaginal canal.
Right.
Yeah,
Before there's that skin in between them.
yes, exactly. But yeah, I mean, it's I just my heart just breaks every day when I hear stories of other parents. It's the worst things. We'll hear from a parent and you like look at their social media and it's just like happy baby shower, can't wait to be a big brother,
Right.
like blah blah blah. And then it's like our baby was born still. Here's a picture of
Right.
them, not alive. Like, and we just see it constantly, and we cannot take it anymore. And we're just like, we don't care what we need to do. We are going to do it, and this problem is going to stop.
Yeah.
We set our mission when we started as to reduce the stillbirth rate by 20% by 2030. And of course, the data is way behind, so we have no idea if we're actually on track for that or not. But with the rate of change that we have seen in the last couple of years, like our board is actually pushing us to change our mission to eliminate preventable stillbirth in the United States by 2035.
Nice.
So a little ambitious, but
It's okay.
who's gonna do it besides moms,
Right.
right? So that's why we're here.
Amazing. I can't thank you enough for being on here and for doing everything that you're doing. In Hebrew, there's a phrase that we say called yasher koach, and it's like you are strong and you should have the will to be able to complete what your mission is. And it's everything you're doing, everything that you've talked about. I know it comes from a place of deep, deep grief and pain, but it's also so beautiful to see how Alana lives on and how she really is helping you and guiding you and making a difference in other people's lives and in other people being able to hold their babies and being able to raise a family. So thank you for everything.
Like this is people are always like so shocked to hear that like we've all been volunteers this whole time and stuff, and we're just like, listen, this is how we get to parent our children. It's
Right,
not the way we would have chosen, but this is what's left to us, and this way we get to celebrate them every day.
right,
We get to talk about them, we get to say their names, we get to see the change that they are creating in the world. And like, yes, it's coming from deep grief and pain, but it's also coming from boundless love.
right,
And that I think is the big takeaway for other bereaved parents, is to know that yes, the grief and pain is there, but it pales in comparison to the love that you have for your child, and nobody can take that away.
right. And to be able to talk about them, I think that part of it is also huge. That really quickly, what you had talked about before, that in our culture, we don't talk about death. We don't acknowledge that something bad happened. And the fact is that, yes, something bad might have happened, but that doesn't mean you still can't talk about the pregnancy and the birth and who they were. And even for people that have lived long lives, you don't want to ignore their life. You want to talk about them. You want to remember stories about them, and that's okay.
Exactly. It's okay and it's beautiful and it's what they do.
Yeah. Totally. Well, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. We will include all of the resources in the show notes. And
Awesome.
I'm gonna follow you on Instagram because I'm excited to see what else you guys
Yes,
put
yes,
out there.
please
So
do. Yeah, I should mention also for other bereaved parents listening, on the Push website. So we don't do like bereavement support. However, again, we're all bereaved parents, and so we have a very long list of hand-picked recommended resources. Everything from books and social media accounts and podcasts. We got to add this podcast to it, and our partners who have support groups or like peer mentoring, and yeah, children's books, special stuff for non-birthing partners, special stuff for LGBTQ families, special stuff for terminations for medical reasons, special stuff for BIPOC families. So there is a big wealth of resources, pushpregnancy.org/resources, that you can find there. And yeah, and anybody should feel free to reach out to us anytime. We're happy to always connect you to anybody we can that might be able to help with whatever it is you're dealing with. So
perfect. Thank you so much.
great. Thank you so much. Have a great one.
You too.
Thank you for joining me today on Pushing Through Loss. I hope this episode has provided support, understanding, and a sense of community. Remember, You are not alone on your journey, and you have the strength to face the challenges that come your way. If you found value in today's conversation, please leave me a review and consider sharing it with others who may benefit. Together, we can help each other heal and activate our inner strength warriors. Stay tuned for more empowering conversations, and until next time, you got this.